Hi folks, Josh Clark again. For this recording, I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to some basic elements of design. Again, I want to stress that we are not expecting stewards to be designers. This recording is really to give you an idea of what designers consider and to explain some vocabulary you might hear. When a design professional discusses siting elements in a landscape, they are specifically talking about the wheres and whys of their design. A lot of the first few recordings in this series sets the groundwork for siting elements in and around a landscape. The first vocabulary word that I'd like to highlight is legibility. Legibility directly relates to how a viewer of a landscape or project can understand the landscape or project. A big complaint we get about native plants, which we use predominantly in our BMPs, is that they look like weeds or look wild. By installing them in such a way through spacing, massing, and layering, which I'll talk about shortly, the plants begin to look intentional, and the viewer can recognize typical landscape cues that are common in the American landscape aesthetic. So massing describes how we group plants together. Typically with perennials, for example, we mass them together with the same species. The effect of this is to concentrate color or texture in an area, balance another part of the planting, or simply to take up space. Layering works with groups of plants with specific functions in specific places within the planting. This is a three-dimensional process which creates depth in a planting. Layering with depth in mind means that specific massings or individual plants are placed in the landscape in such a way that larger or taller plants are in the back while smaller plants are towards the front. This allows for all of the plants to be seen and creates a hierarchy of things to look at. Layering layers vertically is like layering for depth in that different sized plants serve different functions. It breaks the planting bed up into vertical layers that highlight structure, seasonal interest, and ground covers. Structural plants are larger plants or elements that anchor a planting. Seasonal interest plants change throughout the year, showing a different color or texture depending on the season. It is helpful to measure this component with a seasonal interest chart, which I will be covering in a different recording. The ground cover layer is exactly what it sounds like, using plants that fill in and around and cover any remaining piece of ground not being taken up by the other layers. This is important as heavier density helps outcompete invasive plants and is more efficient with the uses of resources, and it also reduces some maintenance considerations like mulching and watering over time. When designers talk about scale, they are referring to the size relationship of one thing to another. In landscape design, there are many scalar relationships to think about. Designers consider the size and the relation between a practice and the context of the landscape around it. They also consider the size of the practice or planting in relation to the human size and how it relates to the human form. Repetition and rhythm is the using and reusing of the same element in a sequence. This can add formality to a planting area and shows intentionality with a planting. It also sets up expectations for the viewer and unifies a landscape. This concludes this recording. As you encounter elements of design that you might not understand or have other questions, don't hesitate to let me know.